Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nathan Unshuffled. This is an exciting episode I've been planning for quite some time. This is finally my Dream Theater album rankings. This is the next episode in my what I call Unshuffled series because I'm Nathan Unshuffled, so all the things I'm talking about are kind of random albums, random songs that me and my wife react to. You know, that's kind of the gimmick, is that everything's kind of on shuffle here because you never know what album or song is going to come up next. But in the case of this, I call it Unshuffled because I'm actually putting things in an order, a very specific order. And so that's the concept of the show. And today we're covering Dream Theater, one of my all-time favorite bands. I've done this album rankings for several bands that are really important to me. Really recommend you check those out. I did album rankings for Yes, which was really a big show that I put a lot of time and effort into that I was really proud of. I did one for Gentle Giant. I did one for Big Big Train, Frost, and Neil Morse Band, to name some of the ones that have happened so far, and I plan a lot more in the future. But today we're covering Dream Theater, which is one of the most important bands that kind of got me into the more modern prog scene, and so I'm very thankful to them and their, everything that they stand for, and really wanted to dedicate a show basically to honor their career and their discography in a way. So basically the premise of the show is I'm ordering these from my least favorite to favorite albums. Over the course of the last month and a half, I've been listening through their entire catalog and really trying to carefully judge how I feel about each album and where it would sit in some sort of order. And like I always say, this is just kind of a fun exercise. Don't take this too seriously. I know everyone's order is going to be totally different. You're probably going to be surprised that why would he rank this album this high? Why is this so low? I'm sure it's not going to quite match up to how you feel about these albums, but I hope you find it interesting to get my perspective and my thoughts. And I'm more just basing it on personal feeling. What did this album mean to me? What kind of memories does it evoke when I hear it? And just, what matches up with my taste most? Because everyone has different tastes, and I think with a band as diverse as Dream Theater, you kind of come into the band liking different aspects of them. Whether you like kind of the more heavier metal aspect, or some of the proggier instrumental stuff that they do, or even some of the more catchier songs, great choruses and great melodies that they come up with. There's just a multitude of different things that they do and that they're really great at that could bring you into the band and make you prefer certain albums over others. So as an introduction, I'm sure many of you watching this know and are very familiar with Dream Theater and their history, but they're an American progressive metal band that was formed in 1985 under the name Majesty by John Petrucci, John Myung, and Mike Portnoy when they attended the Berklee College of Music in Boston, Massachusetts. They ended up dropping out there and decided to focus their efforts on the band that they were creating and came up with Dream Theater and released their first album in, I believe, 1989 when Dream and Day Unite. And then afterwards, James Labrie replaced their original vocalist and became a mainstay of the band from that point on. And they've gone through a few lineup changes throughout their career, but that core group stayed for quite some time of Petrucci, Myung, and Mike Portnoy until Mike Portnoy left the band a while back after the release of Black Clouds and Silver Lining. I believe that was around 2009, 2010, around that time period. So, really a cool storied history of the band. They have 15 albums to go through, so I'm going to get on it and go through them in my order, and hopefully you guys will appreciate and have fun with this. Like I always say, I just focus on the studio albums. I don't do EPs or live albums or anything like that, so you won't see those ranked on this list, just the 15 straight-ahead studio albums that they did. I did want to mention at the outset A Change of Seasons, which isn't an official full-length studio album, but is an incredible release by them. Change of Seasons is one of their iconic tracks, so I think it deserves to be mentioned in a show where I'm trying to capture everything about Dream Theater. I love the epic. I think it's fantastic. It has a great message and theme, really meaningful, and I think it's just one of their better epics and deserves mention here. So there you go. That's kind of the honorable mention, and let's get into the rankings. So at number 15, the very last record is their very first record, When Dream and Day Unite from 1989. I'm going to show my CDs. A lot of them are kind of old and very used because these are albums I've had in my collection for years and years, and I've listened to them to death, but I thought it'd be fun as the visual aid to kind of show those. But anyways, When Dream and Day Unite at number 15, and really this is probably unfair, but I think it's just because it doesn't feel like what would become known as Dream Theater because they have a different singer. Charlie Dominici was the singer for this album, and it feels a lot less polished than their albums to come. There's a lot of rawness, and some people may like that. There's a lot of energy and a lot of young kind of fire to the band at this point. They're trying to establish themselves. You see little flashes of what would be to come on the album. The Yetzi Jam is a great instrumental that kind of harkens forward towards some of their more instrumental moments that they become known for. And there's some great songs like The Killing Hand. I love a lot of these tracks. A great little kind of mini epic. I love Only a Matter of Time is a great kind of album closer that shows some proggier moments. But overall, I just don't find this one as memorable. I think it's just the band trying to find its footing as in their early parts of their career, and they'd take such a giant leap forward even on their next album that it's hard to consider this in the same breath as what was to come for me. And because I really associate James LaBrie as the voice of the band, I really have to rank this as their lowest. But to rank this as their lowest, and it's still a pretty awesome album, showcases how much talent there is here and how great their albums really are. So that's number 15. At number 14, I've got their self-titled Dream Theater album from 2013. And once again, it was really difficult to rank a lot of these, to be honest, because there's always things I like about each album, and it's hard to decide what's better, what's worse. It sometimes just comes down to a feeling. But I just feel like with this one, why it's ranked low is just it's not as memorable as a lot of their other albums. I almost forget about it sometimes. It's one of the ones that was released after Mike Portnoy left the band, which was such a big loss for the group. Of course, they brought on board Mike Mangini, and this is their second album with Mike Mangini. And, there's a lot of good tracks on it. When I listen to it, I'm like, yeah, this is actually pretty good. I forgot that there's so many really cool tracks on it. Like The Looking Glass is a cool, like, Rush-inspired song. Enigma Machine is a really fun instrumental that, like, has this little almost Inspector Gadget type theme to it, but is really fun instrumental. Surrender to Reason is a cool little hidden gem of a track that I really enjoy. And of course there's the big epic at the end that's really well put together, Illumination Theory. Although, sometimes I feel like it's a little bit strange how it segues into this really atmospheric section in the middle that feels like it maybe doesn't connect with some of the other pieces of it. But overall, it's great music, and it really has a satisfying conclusion, and there's just great moments. That's how I feel about this album, is that they had some great moments sprinkled throughout, but overall it just doesn't hang together as a cohesive album for me. It's one that's, like I said, somewhat forgettable. And I feel like it's them still trying to find their footing after losing Mike Portnoy and not quite figuring out who they are yet. It's just a very basic album. It's kind of, what you'd imagine if you're like, let's just throw together, like, what you'd imagine a Dream Theater album should be without much, like, firepower or creativity in the mix. So that's why I have to rank this on the lower end. But I still enjoy listening to the album. So even though it's ranked so low, I still find a lot to enjoy here. So once again, showcasing how strong their catalog really is. At number 13, another one that's hard to rank for me, but I think it has to go here at 13 for me, is Systematic Chaos. So I have the special edition over here and then just the regular edition too, which this album, you'd think it would be one that's really good, like on the surface. Like when you look at the structure of the track list, that there's some epic tracks, that there's some interesting shorter tracks and different makes and variety in the track list. It's from that classic Mike Portnoy era that I really like, where Jordan Rudess is part of the group, and it's before Mike Portnoy leaves, so it came out in 2007, right when I was really into the band. because I came on board with the band right after like 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence was released. So this was one of the first few albums that was like brand new to me, and I was excited and anticipating. Of course, this Train of Thought before this one as well, and Octavarium. But this was just an album I was anticipating, and it just disappointed me, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. But just everything in the middle kind of is just a variable quality. Like I really love In the Presence of Enemies that opens and closes. I think it's an incredible epic. Once again, I'm a little uncertain if it works for me that it's split into 2 halves, but a minor quibble. I love the intro, I love the beginning of it, and I love how it ends with this kind of big epic closer. Some of the greatest proggier moments are in this big epic split across these two halves, but everything in the middle, they go into this kind of heavier, more Metallica style mode that I don't really care for, with Constant Motion and even Dark Eternal Night. I mean, there's some cool quirky instrumental things going on, but overall it just isn't really my style. Prophets of War is a fun song, but really relying on that Muse style that they're really developing both on Octavarium and here, that has somewhat mixed results for me. I love Repentance because I love the 12-step suite, and this is the piece of it on this album, and I think it's just a beautiful kind of extended ballad. But once again, it's kind of weird to take this out of the 12-step suite and just put it in the middle here without much context, but I think it's a really lovely track, so one of my favorites on this. And I've always kind of been conflicted about Ministry of Lost Souls. Like, I feel like it's a ballad that's just really expanded to fit and seem like an epic, even though it could just be this short, compact little ballad. So it feels a little bit like longer than it needs to be, and the instrumental section that kind of comes out of nowhere, it doesn't quite fit the mood of the piece for me sometimes. I don't know, maybe it's something I just need to listen to more, but on the surface I would have thought this would have been one of my favorite tracks, and it just never has really worked for me. So just a mixed bag a little bit. What works really works well and is great stuff, but overall I just don't think it comes together in a perfect way as an album, and so that's why it just doesn't rank as highly for me. Even though I love it, it's just, doesn't quite make for a cohesive package like I was hoping at the time. Number 12 is Distance Over Time from 2019. I have it over here. Don't have it on CD. This is when I kind of transitioned over to vinyl instead. But this is their album that came out before their latest one, and it's a solid album. I know it was kind of billed as a bit of a return to form because, as I'll get to soon, they went really out of left field on The Astonishing, which I think polarized the audience a bit because it was such a big swing and for a lot of people a big miss. So I think this was kind of a return to their basics, a return to like the core Dream Theater sound. And I know they were trying to streamline their sound a bit and do kind of shorter pieces. They really don't have any epic length tracks on here. And I like the epic length tracks, so I kind of miss it a little bit. I feel like even though there's good songs here, I feel like it could use a bit more of that epicness that they're known for, a little bit more prog moments. I don't know, it's just once again kind of similar to Systematic Chaos, a little bit of a mixed bag at times. Some songs work better than others. Overall, I'm positive on the album. I think it's a really well done record and has some great songs on it. Fall Into the Light is a great track that I like, that starts out with this kind of Metallica vibe with some big drumming, and then there's this kind of lighter section with a great acoustic guitar leading into a great solo from John Petrucci, and then another solo by Jordan Rudess. That's one of my favorite parts of the record. I really do like Barstool Warrior, which is kind of a more proggier song without much of that heaviness, that kind of has an interesting storyline to it and kind of an uplifting feel to it in a way. S to N, or Signal to Noise, is a really cool highlight with some great jamming, and I like the kind of instrumental section that goes on where the music kind of stops for a minute and then starts back up, and it's quirky and unexpected, and I really like that. And Pale Blue Dot is a great, fantastic closer that brings in that kind of big prog moment that I'm looking for. But, you know, it's just, once again, there's a few of the other tracks on there don't quite hit as well for me. Out of Reach is kind of just a typical Dream Theater ballad without much going on there. Room 137, kind of a fun, quirky little song, but not really, you know, blowing my mind or anything. Paralyzed is kind of a typical heavier Dream Theater single. Just, you know, it's not quite up to the levels of some of their classic material to me. They're still kind of working out who they are as a band. Some of these Mike Mangini era albums are just, it feels like the band's kind of trying to circle around what they want to be and aren't quite sure yet what they're going to land on. I think they do a bit better on their latest record, which I'll get to soon. They're getting there. This album's kind of heading in the direction of what they're wanting to do, but it lacks that like big epic moment that I want to return to it with, you know, if that makes sense. For some reason, it doesn't hit me as hard as some of their other albums, so to speak. So moving on to number 11, as I kind of alluded to as I was talking about that one, I'm going to put The Astonishing at number 11. Which is another Mike Mangini era album from 2016. And like I said, it was a big swing for the band, I think. And it really threw me off when I first heard it. You know, I was excited for the new Dream Theater record, and I heard it was a big, sprawling concept record, telling a big, epic sci-fi story and whatnot. And so for me, as a big prog nerd, that was exciting. I was like, okay, I'm on board with that. I think that could be really fun. But when I heard it, I was like, this is kind of different, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it. You know, I like some of the things on it. I like the overture and all the different instrumental stuff going on there. I liked some of, like, A Gift of Music is a great opening track. But then it gets into these more ballad-esque, you know, more, almost would feel more at home on like Disney or Broadway kind of feel. A little bit cheesy, a little bit just really different than what I expected from Dream Theater. And for a while, I really just didn't care for this record. I just thought, okay, this is, you know, I usually love everything Dream Theater does, but this is a little bit of a miss for me. Maybe I just have to move on. But as I listened to it more and gave it more of a chance, I started to like it a bit more. I started to kind of understand what they were going for. I think it was a really bold choice for them to really lean into this kind of musical opera, rock opera style that's so separate. Because they did a concept record with Scenes from a Memory, but it's more of a traditional prog record at the same time. This one, like, is not at all like that. It's totally like a musical, a play set to music that is like, there's characters and they're speaking, and, you know, it goes through a storyline of they're going from this place to this place, and it's very different and interesting. And I will say that I think James LaBrie has one of his strongest performances here, because he's kind of tasked with voicing all these different characters and conveying all these different emotions and story beats, and I think he does a really great job. And a lot of the writing is really interesting. I like Jordan Rudess's contribution. I think he gets a bigger chance to shine because the keyboards and like orchestrations and things that he does with keyboard and his other devices that he uses really bring a big character to this album, more so even than a lot of the other albums. But like I said, it's a mixed bag. Some of it works. I think it's a little overlong. I think especially the first disc could probably be shortened a bit, and, you know, maybe that would help it, because I just feel like there's so many ballads and slower paced tracks that it just kind of becomes a slog through parts of that, especially that first half. But there's great standout moments. I love A New Beginning. Moment of Betrayal is a great track. There's a great instrumental fugue style section at the beginning of A Life Left Behind. I love the Genesis style feel of Heaven's Cove. The second disc, I think, has a better pace and really works better. Has some faster paced moments and some instrumental stuff and some interesting story beats. And also the storyline, although interesting, feels a little bit rehashed, a little bit cheesy. Some of the character names are a little bit on the nose, and that's a little bit, can make it feel a little bit silly. But I think it's cool for what it is. I think they really took a swing, and I respect the band for that. That's why I put it up here a little bit higher than maybe traditional wisdom might dictate. But I at least respect them for taking such a big risk with the album and doing something really different and just following their kind of creative muse with it and just going for it. Whereas some of the albums ranked a bit lower, I felt like were a bit safe and them kind of sticking within a familiar lane and not really doing anything very exciting. So got to give them credit for that. But overall, I've struggled to connect with this one. I feel like every listen to it, I feel a different way. Sometimes I listen to it and like, wow, I've been really overlooking this. It's really great. There's some really standout moments. And other times I listen to it and I'm like, oh, it just isn't connecting with me again. And that's kind of how I felt through this listen. Like, oh, I'm just not connecting with it. It's not really giving me what I want for a Dream Theater record. I guess I just have to be in the right mood for it. So it's very circumstantial, but like I said, I never want to talk negatively about bands I love. I don't think this is a bad record. I think it's a good one. It's just not totally for me, maybe, and doesn't totally work in every way for my taste in particular. But I know some people really love this and think it's a standout moment from their catalog. So don't want to discourage that opinion. It's just, that's how I felt about it, especially this time through listening to the album. So let's move into the top 10. So this is one, once again, that probably moves quite a bit as I kind of decide on how I feel about it. It's going to be Falling Into Infinity from 1997. So this is an earlier album in their career. It was kind of a time of transition. They had Derek Sherinian come in for keyboards on this one, as Kevin Moore had left the band. And I think it's a bit of an underrated album. I think it's ranked low by a lot of people. I was almost going to rank this even a slight bit higher than it is here, but upon this re-listen, I think it fits in this spot pretty well. It's a really nice feel and a nice flow. There's a lot of cool songs on it. Maybe it's a bit more poppy than like especially what came before it in Awake and Images and Words, which embraced kind of the heaviness and the progginess a bit more. This one, there's a lot of these kind of lighter pop songs kind of sprinkled throughout, more so than they had done at that point. Such stuff like Take Away My Pain and Anna Lee, Hollow Years. These are all kind of ballad-esque tracks, which isn't really what Dream Theater was known for, at least for me at the time. But between all that, there's some great, amazing prog metal stuff that should never be overlooked, So stuff like the opener, New Millennium, is really a fantastic opener with some great keyboard lines to open it. Kind of a great way to introduce Derek Sherinian. Hell's Kitchen is an amazing instrumental with a great Petrucci guitar solo. It really moves along at a great pace and is just really well crafted and intricate. It's kind of a cool moment for the band where they're doing an instrumental, but it's not really about the fireworks. It's about the feel and just it really has a great vibe to it. I think it's amazing. Lines in the Sand is one of the best pieces on the record. Great epic build-up that goes into an incredible rock groove. Doug Pinnick sings on this as well, and there's just so much to love here. I love the groovy bass line, just a really excellent track, and I love the ending of Trial of Tears, another great kind of Dream Theater epic to close the record. So a lot of great stuff on display here. It's a really good record. I know there was some conflict about what the band wanted versus what the label wanted, and there's a lot of extra tracks that didn't make the cut here, but the Dream Theater wanted to include, that maybe would have enhanced this as an album if Dream Theater kind of got the full impact of what they wanted with this release. But as it stands, I think it's a solid record. Just has a little bit too much for me of kind of these lighter ballad-esque moments that kind of take me out of it. Can feel a bit cheesy, a little bit dated in some aspects, but when they're doing really fantastic stuff here, it really soars and really makes for a great album. So I think it deserves a good, strong spot, and it's an essential Dream Theater listen for me as a fan. So I really love this record and think it deserves its spot here at number 10. All right, so at number 9, we're coming to the new one. This is A View from the Top of the World from this year at number 9. I I have it up above my head here. You can see it up here. I don't have it on CD because, with their later albums, I've been collecting on vinyl rather than CD. But this is a great album, and I did a full review of it, so I don't want to delve too deep here. You can kind of check out my review of it there to get my more full, complete thoughts. But I just think this is an album where it's kind of unfiltered Dream Theater. It's just them like coming together in the studio and doing what they do best, doing what they love, really embracing the prog and just putting it all out there. Where some of their albums prior to this one, they were very specific about wanting to go for a certain thing. Distance Over Time, they wanted shorter, more compact songs. Astonishing was, of course, its own thing with its like kind of sprawling rock opera type feel. But this one, they're just like, we're just going to go into the studio and whatever comes out is what we're going to do. And I respect that a lot. I think that's where they're at their best, is just truly embracing the progginess, what they want to do. And this album really shines because of it. It's such a powerful record. There's no like ballads on here. It's all just heavy progressive rock, and it's really great stuff. Every track has its highlights and moments. The Alien is such a powerful opener that is really strong. Invisible Monster is more of a mid-tempo feel that kind of feels a bit like classic Dream Theater. I really like that. Sleeping Giant is kind of a mini epic that is really strong and goes through a lot of different feels. Transcending Time is the more major chord, Rush-inspired track that I think fits really well. And this listen through, I was really impressed with Awaken the Master, that I think is a really cool, heavy song that really makes great use of that 8-string guitar that Petrucci is bringing into the mix here. The title track is really great. It's a good, serviceable epic. Maybe not one of their best all-time epics. I feel like it's has a few drawbacks in it where it doesn't quite connect as a full piece, but overall the sections are really enjoyable, and I love kind of that mid section that's more of a slower feel but with some great vocal melodies, and there's lots of great twists and turns. So it's a solid album. Once again, maybe this is a little bit low, but it's so brand new, I don't want to raise it up too high. And I do feel that while it's a solid album, there's nothing like, I don't know if there's anything here that stand up like with the true classics of their catalog, if that makes sense. Even though it's really fun to listen to, and I think it really harkens back to the era of Dream Theater that I like the most, where they really embrace their progginess. I also feel that maybe it's a bit heavier for my tastes. I feel like throughout the years, as I was listening through their catalog, I was noticing that throughout the years they tend to get heavier and heavier, maybe to progress with how music is shifting throughout time. The bands are getting heavier as they go, especially in that field of progressive metal. They kind of started there on that path with like Train of Thought and moved in that direction. I feel like even now they really embrace that in a way, and maybe that's not as much to my taste and why I regard this album a bit lower. But there's a lot of great stuff for a progressive rock fan to enjoy on here, and I appreciate them just going into the studio and doing whatever came to mind without much preconception, and just, this is us, let's lay it all out on the table, and we're not going to worry about track lengths and we want this type of style of song or this or that. We're just going to do what feels right to us right now. And I think what came out was really brilliant. So I really love that record. And it's a strong contender for one of my favorite albums of the year. So that just speaks, that it's number 9 in their catalog speaks to how strong the albums coming up are to me. So there we go. So number 8, I thought this was fitting to slot here at number 8, is their 8th album, Octavarium, which came out in 2005. I really appreciate this album. It's a really great album, and I think they were trying to kind of put in a lot of Easter eggs and to make it kind of a fun experience for fans. I think Mike Portnoy probably had a lot to do with that. The sequence of the album is mirroring an octave on a keyboard, where each song is in a different key that kind of moves up through the keyboard. And I think that's kind of a cool effect. There's even little transitional tracks that kind of lead you into the next key. So I think that's a really interesting concept. Although I feel like it's kind of interesting, there's a lot of things that they're trying to do that make you want to feel like this is a concept record, but all the songs are pretty different, and don't really hook together necessarily as a conceptual piece. So sometimes that throws me off a little bit, but I think all of the pieces are really great. I love the opening, The Root of All Evil, starts with a bang with this, next piece of the 12-step suite. But there's a couple more poppier, almost U2 style inspired songs like The Answer Lies Within and I Walk Beside You. Solid and some good stuff. But maybe not what I expect totally from some of the bigger Dream Theater moments. Panic Attack is a really classic song that's kind of a heavy assault on your senses, especially after these more poppier tracks at the beginning. But I love all the Crazy Time signatures and what they're doing with it. Never Enough is one of their first forays into that Muse-style sound, and I think it works maybe slightly better than the Systematic Chaos Prophets of War does. It's really fantastic, especially the drumming here. I've always loved Sacrifice Sons. It kind of starts a little bit darker. It has these news clips from like 9/11 and really speaks to that period of time. Has the slower melodic ballad feel before it heads into this really cool twisty instrumental section. I just think it's epic and really cool. If this album didn't have Octavarium, which is like their biggest, longest epic, it would provide for a good epic closer, I think. But then you get Octavarium, which to me is sort of a love letter to all things prog, which of course is right up my alley. There's kind of a bit of a Pink Floyd style opening similar to Shine On You Crazy Diamond before the band kicks in with their theme. There's like a slower opening with vocals and acoustic guitar that almost makes you feel like a Genesis 12-string guitar kind of feel, like Cinema Show or something like that. Then it picks up in tempo. There's this great section where the lyrics kind of circle around each other. It's like they connect from one thing to the next and provide all of these different musical references. And it just comes to the end with a big epic ending, much like they're used to with the big epic fashion. So I think it's a really strong album that really showcases the band and all their different styles. There's heaviness, there's some poppier tracks, there's a lot of prog here, there's metal, especially on the opening, Root of All Evil. It's really everything Dream Theater's about in a very cool, interesting stew. And so I think it's a really great album to show maybe a newcomer into the band what the band's about. I have a little bit more nostalgia for certain albums which will come above this one, but I can see why people would rank it highly and really consider this one of the greats, because it's a really great album and deserves strong praise, because I think Dream Theater was really firing on all cylinders here. And of course it's the lineup of the band that I really like, with Jordan Rudess is an established member of the group at this point. Mike Portnoy is still with the band and hasn't left yet and has a major influence on the sound. And I think this one just really works as a strong album for the band, and really love it. So definitely high marks for me, and kind of starts what I feel is this kind of really high level list of albums, starting from this one up till the end of my list here. So I think these kind of go to the next level, in my opinion. So next I have Awake from 1994 on my list at number 7, maybe. This might be one of the ones that is probably a lot different than what a lot of other people might say, because I think a lot of people rank this pretty highly. It's one of their classic albums. It came right after Images and Words, and I even had it ranked a bit higher when I initially conceived my list, but as I listened through the albums and was trying to verify my opinion of each one, this one didn't grab me as much as I was expecting it to, and I'm not sure I quite put my finger on why that is. But I still love it. Like I said, I spoke very high praise of Octavarium just barely, so you should know that all of these albums in this top 8 are all like pretty much perfect albums for me. So it's a bit of arbitrary of how they fall a little bit. But this one, it's a classic. It brings so much memory. I in fact, as I was listening to it, I was reminded of the time period where I kind of got into Dream Theater. I'll talk a bit more about the exact introduction to them a bit later with some of their other albums, but I had been hooked by them by some of their more current albums like Scenes from Memory and 6 Degrees, and so I was kind of going backwards and delving back into their catalog at the time because I was so much in love with them, and I was discovering the band, and it was a lot of fun. And I remember this album being one I listened to a lot, like my dad is a musician, and he'd take me a lot on his gigs. I would help kind of be the roadie and help him set up and do that kind of stuff. And while the band was playing, because they played the same kinds of songs every night, it wasn't really the kind of music I was really into at the time. I would kind of find a separate corner to go into and to put on my headphones, my little Discman, and listen to the big prog albums that I was really getting into at the time. And this was one of the ones that I listened to on fairly constant rotation. So it brought to mind those memories of me, finding some hidden room in whatever venue my dad was playing at, and just putting on these headphones and just, until their gig was over, like just really loving Dream Theater and experiencing it until I had to help tear down their setup after their gig. So it brought back those memories. So that really lifted it in a sense. But I feel like I much prefer Images and Words, obviously, since it's not up yet on my countdown here. But I feel like this one isn't quite as much embracing the prog as Images and Words did. It's more of a streamlined sound. I feel like it's more darker, more atmospheric. It really leans into some of their more metal tendencies, and for me that's less interesting. What I love about the band is kind of this blend of styles, and them really doing these crazy cool instrumental proggy sections. And there's a bit of that here, don't get me wrong. They have a whole instrumental, Erotomania, that is kind of a quirky, cool prog instrumental, but especially at the beginning, it's a lot of shorter tracks that, focus more on feel and just having kind of this bigger chorus. They have little instrumental sections, granted, that rise them up in my opinion, but have never been like totally my top favorites. I really do adore 6 O'Clock though, that opens the album. Great drum fills and just really a fun energy to that track. I like The Mirror, which kind of like feels like a prototype to this 12-step suite to come. Lie is a great single, but a little bit more in that like heavier, metal vein, but really catchy. Scarred is a cool little kind of epic kind of sandwich towards the end here. And I love the closer, Space Divest, which I think is a perfect kind of send-off for Kevin Moore. Very dark and moody, just kind of focused on piano and voice for a lot of it, but really a great vibe and feel to it. So, like I said, a bit of a mixed bag for me. Some tracks work better than others. I wish there was a little bit more prog on board here, but it's just really a fun album at the same time, and it was fun to revisit and to kind of bring back those feelings from when I was first listening to it, like I mentioned. Just a really cool vibe, and I respect them for where they were heading, and I know this is a big album for them, and I know a lot of people love it and regard it as a total classic, and are probably going to be flabbergasted by what I have above it here coming shortly. But I for some reason, this listen through, I wasn't connecting with it quite on the same level as some of the ones that I put above it. So there you have it. And number 7 was Awake. Now we move to number 6, which I initially had this a lot lower, and this really surprised me because I've always had kind of mixed feelings about this one. But I'm putting it high up here at number 6 just because it really, really spoke to me this time through for some reason. And that's Train of Thought from 2003. I was initially a bit disappointed because, like I've talked about throughout this list, I'm not into heavier music, really. I like the more proggy moments of the band. I'm not a big metal person. I don't care for bands like Metallica, Iron Maiden, these heavier metal bands. I'm more into the prog bands. And so when I like progressive metal, it's usually progressive metal that leans more proggy than it does metal. Whereas this album leans probably more in the metal direction. But I think it just really works somehow. It's just such a cohesive package of an album. Every track hits hard and is really strong. There is a lot of cool proggy instrumental sections amidst all the heaviness and darkness. But to me, it just works as almost a conceptual piece of just like they had a specific vision for this album, I believe, to make this kind of heavier record. And I just think they really realized that vision in a great way. So that's why I had to bump this up. I think it's a really strong record. I really love a lot of the moments on it. As I Am is a great opener that maybe follows that Metallica style mold, but it really gets you pumped and ready for the album. This Dying Soul is a really intricate, interesting piece that just has so much going on, but it's another great piece of that 12-step suite. I love Endless Sacrifice, one of my all-time favorite Dream Theater tracks. A bit slower in the beginning, which I think works well because it's a bit of a break after the heavy onslaught of This Dying Soul, but then it builds up and has such a cool instrumental section in the second half. I love Vacant. It's kind of another breather track, a kind of a slower, more beautiful ballad with some great like cello or in the mix. I really love that, leading into one of their best instrumental pieces, Stream of Consciousness. And then In the Name of God closes it out in a great way with this kind of big prog metal epic that just has so many of the hallmarks of their sound all throughout it. So just a really compact, cool record. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's a good little package, a great length, and really showcases the band doing what they do best, and I have to respect them for it. And I just really enjoyed listening to the album this time around, and so I bumped it up a few spots. I think it's really solid, and I think they really realized their vision with it, and that's kind of why I placed it so high. I think it deserves a high placement for that. So now we get into my top 5, and like I said, this is personal favorites. If I was just trying to do the objective list of like what objectively is the best Dream Theater albums, it would be a lot different, because there's different metrics involved when you're trying to objectively decide what's good about this album. You're looking at the composition, you're looking at the musicianship, you're looking at what holds it together, and all of that stuff, comes to play. But when I do these lists of most favorite to least favorite, I'm really putting in a big piece of this personal element to me of what this album means to me. So at number 5 is Black Clouds and Silver Linings from 2009. And I have a feeling this is probably pretty high for some of you. You might not think of this album as highly as I do. But like I said, I think it has a lot to do with the time it came out and what it meant to me personally, and that it was just the right album at the right time. This was me towards the end of my college days, and I was really looking forward to a new Dream Theater. Like I said, I was pretty disappointed by Systematic Chaos. Felt like it didn't have the total proggy elements I was looking for. And then there was a lot of hype for this album. I think Mike Portnoy came on and said, like, imagine an album that has, like, starts off with The Glass Prison and then has this, he like, kind of structured out the album like it's every classic Dream Theater track all in one album kind of thing, if I remember right. I don't remember exactly the comparisons he made, but there was a lot of build-up and anticipation and excitement, and to me, it totally paid off. I totally loved this record when I first heard it. It opens and ends with 2 of my favorite all-time Dream Theater pieces of music. I love Nightmare to Remember. I think it's so cool, so heavy, so fun. Tells a really interesting story, has these different sections to it, has great instrumental interplay that I love, just so intense and has such a cool vibe to it. And then, of course, I love Count of Tuscany, which I reacted to with my wife. Really love that one a lot. I think it's a really amazing epic piece that just really showcases everything strong about the band. I love the opening. I think it's one of the best instrumental openings ever. I love the section towards the end with James LaBrie singing beautifully. I love kind of the atmospheric section even in the middle that I think brings a lot of atmosphere and this kind of Pink Floyd vibe. It just has everything that I want in a progressive epic. So to me, that already lifts it to a high level in my estimation. But in the middle is a lot of cool stuff as well. Rite of Passage and Wither are kind of shorter, more, single type tracks. I really like, especially Wither. I think it's a great ballad by them. Rite of Passage is probably the weakest track for me on the album, but still not too bad. Shattered Fortress is just an excellent ending to this 12-step suite, which I've been talking about, that I really love. It brings back all of the moments that I've loved throughout the different songs throughout the other albums. You could quibble and say, does this really work on this album because it feels so separated? because it's based on all these other pieces of music, but I think it works, and I think it's a really exciting conclusion. And then Best of Times is just a beautiful tribute to Mike's father, who passed away, Mike Portnoy, of course. And it's interesting because you hear that it's a tribute to his father, but it's actually has a lot of more uplifting, positive sections. It goes through a lot of moods and feels, it has almost this Rush kind of inspired vibe. And just the ending is just so beautiful with Petrucci's solo that just kind of fades out as he just continues soloing in this beautiful manner. Just one of my favorite examples of his playing. So for me, this record totally works, and was just one that I truly fell in love with at the time. I listened to it constantly. I thought it was just so perfect and just really came at the right time. People quibble with certain things like, is it Dream Theater by numbers in some aspects? Some of the lyrics are maybe a bit cringeworthy and strange. Like some of the storytelling in Count of Tuscany could be construed as kind of strange, and it's kind of a wacky story. Nightmare to Remember has that section of Mike Portnoy kind of growling that feels a little out of place, especially with the story beats at the time. So there's little minor quibbles I would give, but for me, just the great grandiose epicness of it kind of washes that away, and I almost have fondness because of those moments, because I remember reading people's comments about those moments, but they bring a lot of fun and variety to the album, and it just makes for a fun listen. And it also came with an incredible bonus CD that had a bunch of really cool covers as well. So just the whole package, I was totally into it at the time, and I think it's just a fantastic, overlooked record. It's a really great one that I really hold up as one of the greatest examples of what I love about Dream Theater, and their willingness to kind of stretch the boundaries and do a lot of different things in their music. So I've always really been fond of it. So that's my number 5 choice. All right, so now we get to our top 4. And once again, I think this is probably ranked a bit higher than a lot of people might rank this as well, because it is a Mike Mangini era album. It was the album that came out right after Mike Portnoy left. Of course, Black Clouds and Silver Lining was his last album with the band. But this is the first album without him on board, and that's A Dramatic Turn of Events from 2011. I was really depressed, like a lot of people were, when Mike Portnoy left the group. It almost felt like the end of Dream Theater, because I'm just such a huge Mike Portnoy fan. He's one of my top favorite musicians of all time. I love all his work, of course, with Neil Morse and what they've done together with Neil Morse's solo stuff and with Transatlantic and so forth. So for him to leave the group was just such a crushing moment. Came out of nowhere, for me at least, and I was just so shocked by it. And I'm like, how are they going to continue without him? It's going to be impossible, because his personality and his character was such an important part of the band. And he's such an established founding member. So I was really scared, to be honest. I was worried when they announced this album was being released, and I was like, well, what is it going to sound like? Is it going to be like a totally different band? But the honest truth is, the album blew me away. I think there was a lot on the line for the band. I think they probably felt some pressure, and I think maybe that produced a diamond in this album, because for me, I just think every track works really well. I think it harkens back to some of their classic era stuff. It's them kind of like their latest album. I view them in almost similar ways, but I think this album does it slightly better, where it's just them, it feels at least like them just doing what they do best without really worrying too much about, let's streamline this in this way. Let's do an album that's focused like this. I think it was just them like trying to prove themselves and say, we're going to just be us. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to try to move forward from this and show that we're still a force to be reckoned with, and I think it really worked. I just love every track. It just, once again, it came out at a perfect time for me, where I was really ready for new Dream Theater and really anxious for an album. And I think it hit the mark, and which is really such a feat to me, because, they could have just crumbled under the pressure of like everyone saying, oh, how are they going to continue? Can it really be called Dream Theater without Mike Portnoy? There's all those kinds of comments coming out at the time, and I'm sure Mike Mangini felt a lot of pressure being the replacement. But this album covers so much ground. It has heavier tracks, has some ballads, that I think are really amongst their best ballads. A whole lot of progginess. I love Breaking All Illusions is one of my all-time favorite tracks from the band. I think it just goes in so many great directions. Has some like cool, quirky instrumental moments that are fun, like this section that goes through like almost within just a few seconds, feels like it goes through so many different stylistic changes, from almost like a this kind of Boston-esque kind of organ to a funk disco kind of inspired section to this like Petrucci solo. It's just a magical moment, and the song just really works for me on every level. Lost Is Not Forgotten is just a heavy onslaught that really brings back that metal vibe. Bridges in the Sky is a fantastic longer track. I love Outcry, that just has some insane instrumental work, kind of almost harkening back to like Dance of Eternity levels of cool, crazy instrumental madness with different time signatures and so forth. I think On the Backs of Angels is a great opener, and like I said, all of the different ballads really work for me in various ways. So I just think it's a really well put together album that just really showcases the band at their best, coming out of a difficult period and really showing that they can still shine, even without Mike Portnoy, which seemed like an impossible task at the time. And like I said, this is no knock on Mike Portnoy. It's invaluable, the contribution he made to the group, and I really love every track he's involved in and his energy and his style. But I was just really impressed with this, that they could carry forward through this tragedy and create an album that really has that Dream Theater magic to me. The only thing that maybe holds it back a slight bit is that I do feel like the drums aren't as powerful and as adventurous and as interesting, but I think it makes sense because Mike Mangini was brought on board and didn't have much input into the drumming. I think it was more just directed by Petrucci. Petrucci kind of created all the drum ideas, and Mangini just kind of was right in line with what they wanted, so he didn't really put any of his personal flavor into it like Mike Portnoy would have. But aside from that, there's just so much going on here that I really love, and I think this album truly succeeds on a big level and has been one that's always been meaningful to me. It's like they're hearkening back to their kind of classic era and doing it in a big way. So, all right, now we get into the top 3, and these are all masterpieces. This is like the 5-star perfect album club to me. So to start this off is 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. Fantastic. Came out in 2002, and this one even maybe raised a bit more in my estimation through this listen through. It's a perfect record. There's no denying it. It's such a mature record. That's the word that came to my mind as I was listening through, especially to that first disc, that it just feels like they've really matured as songwriters and are tackling very serious subject matter and doing it in a very tasteful way. So there's just that kind of serious vibe to that first half of the album. There's some heavier moments, not just in like the music, like The Glass Prison is heavy musically, you know, how it's kind of embracing the metal side of the band, but it's also a heavy topic. And so is a lot of the other tracks on here, like The Great Debate and Misunderstood and things like that. Just, they have this darker, kind of more twisted vibe, and I think it really works as a cohesive album feel. I really love The Glass Prison. I wanted to mention this, it's the first Dream Theater track I ever heard. I've told the story a few times on my channel, but back in the days when I was discovering prog, my dad showed me all of the classic prog, the Yes and Genesis and Gentle Giant artists, and so I was really wanting to find more modern music that was in that style. So I went off in search on my own, and I came across Transatlantic at the time and found out that it was made up of members from various different groups. And so I thought, well, sounds like the perfect way to introduce myself to this modern prog and decide what things I want to follow would be to download a track from each of these different artists. So the track I downloaded from Dream Theater was The Glass Prison. And at the time, I'll be honest, I thought it was a bit too heavy for me at the time. I didn't care for metal at all back then, even less so than I care for it now. And I'm just like, well, this isn't for me. And I moved more towards the direction of Spock's Beard and the Flower Kings at the time, because that was more in line with the classic prog sound that I had been falling in love with, that my dad was showing me. But over time, as I got more into the different albums that people considered some of the best ones, and wanting to dive deeper into the modern prog scene now that I had dipped my toes in, everyone talked about Scenes from Memory, and so that really hooked me in, which I'll talk about again later. But after that, I went back and bought 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence once I was hooked by Scenes from a Memory, and listened to this song in a whole new context and said, man, I really love this now. I don't know what I was missing out before. It really grabbed me, and now I'm a total huge fan of it, and it's one of my favorite Dream Theater songs. So Glass Prison is just a great example of the heaviness that they do, but also a lot of interesting proggy instrumental sections. It just really provides that great blend. I love Blind Faith, has always been a personal favorite of mine, and especially the instrumental dueling between guitar and keys. I love Jordan's organ sound in the track. I love Misunderstood. It's just this long, darker song that's like a twisted ballad that kind of grows in intensity. And Great Debate is another great song with some serious topics being discussed. A lot of that kind of news chatter to start it off with. And then it ends with this melancholic Radiohead-esque kind of ballad, All Disappear. A perfect disc. It just fits so perfectly together. And then there's a whole nother disc of this big major prog epic called 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence that starts with this big orchestrated keyboard moving into all these different sections. And once again, there's some heavier sections in the middle there with War Inside My Head and The Test That Stumped Them All, but there's a lot of lighter, proggier stuff too to kind of balance that out, like Solitary Shell and About to Crash, both the beginning and the reprise. Just has a really lighter, proggy, upbeat feel that I really love. So I think it kind of provides a great balance, where the first disc is the heavier, darker side of the band, more serious, more, them doing this darker mood, where the second disc to me is more them embracing their lighter, proggier side. Even though there's moments that are heavier, overall the vibe I get is more uplifting and more positive and more just trying to bring this kind of epic feel to the track and more of that prog influence that they're known for. And I especially love the live version that brings in a full orchestra for that score DVD that they did. That even elevates it to another level. So I just think it's a great epic. I think it just kind of works well as this kind of yin and yang kind of dichotomy in my head, at least, of disc 1 versus disc 2. And it's just a perfect album, just really the band firing on all cylinders, and one of my favorites by the group, and one of the first albums I heard in full from them after Scenes from Memory, which, as you could tell, we'll be getting to soon. So great album, and I'm loving it even more upon repeated listens. It's one that even opens up more. That to me is the sign of a great album, that it just continues to open up and bring out new elements as you listen to it more, and this album does that for me. So number 3. All right, and number 2, I had to go with the classic Images and Words at number 2. This is my CD version of Images and Words from 1992, and I really wish I had all these albums on vinyl. I know my vinyl collection behind me is a little sad for this. I just haven't been able to find these albums yet on vinyl, so I hope at some point to build it up a bit better and to get especially some of these higher ranked albums on vinyl when I'm able to. But this is a total classic album. To me, this is a game changer, not just for Dream Theater, but really for the progressive metal world at large. This is one of the seminal defining albums of the whole genre, and so I feel like it has to be honored for that distinction. It's such a total shift from their first album, When Dream and Day Unite. It's like a whole new band. They're re-energized. They just have a whole different vibe and feel to them, and they're playing on the next level. Just all the songs here are just so strong, and what's great is they're just strong songs at their core. They're great, well-written songs, and then they add all this instrumental, fireworks on display that just elevates them even higher. So to me, this is kind of the gold standard of the genre in general, and thus needs to be, of course, put really high on the list. And like I said, I kind of went back to this album. A lot of people's entry point is this album. This is maybe the first album they ever heard from Dream Theater, or one of the first ones. But for me, I listened to Scenes and 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence first, and then delved backwards and kind of went backwards from there, listening to Falling to Infinity, then Awake, and finally this album. So my journey with it's a little different. And I have similar memories of this, as I mentioned with Awake, of kind of roading with my dad and listening to this album in the back rooms of the venues he'd play at. But I just really fell in love with it from the start. I think Pull Me Under is such a great, catchy opener of a song. It was kind of a hit at the time of its release, so it's definitely an important song in their catalog. But to me, the real best parts of the album are kind of in the midst of these 3 major epics that are classics of the band. Take the Time, Metropolis Part 1, and Learning to Live, which are all fantastic, have great instrumental moments, have great choruses that you can sing along to and are memorable. I love just everything about them. I love the middle instrumental bits in Metropolis Part 1. I just think it's such a strong section that just really showcases what Dream Theater is all about, and just this 5-minute instrumental craziness section. And Learning to Live just really brings the prog factor up a level as well. And all the other songs in between are great too. Not to give them, not to say that there's anything wrong with them. It's like I said, it's a perfect 5-star album. Every song hits in the way it's meant to. And what I was kind of surprised by listening back through these albums, because you think of them as the progressive metal pioneers, but this album doesn't feel as heavy as a lot of the albums to come from them to me. It feels like they're really embracing the progressive side of their sound more than you might expect, thinking of them as a metal band and kind of popular within the metal scene at the time. To me, they get way heavier, like starting with 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence and then moving through Train of Thought, and some of those later period albums is really, and even Awake kind of embraces a darker feel and vibe and atmosphere, whereas Images and Words feels to me a little bit more light in its feel. Like it's more like the band having fun and enjoying themselves and just really reveling in these instrumental soloing and sections, which makes for a fun, enjoyable listen every time. It never feels like a slog, never feels too dark and depressing. It's a fun album that's enjoyable to listen to every time. And I guess it shows kind of the facet of metal that it's not, sometimes you equate metal with just this heavy darkness, Satan worshiping, dark moments, but it's really so much more than that. And I think this album kind of showcases that there's a lot of variety, there's a lot of different feels and moods. You can have more of an almost uplifting metal song, and it can be done in a great way. So they're kind of almost conceiving metal in a different way. That's why I think this is such a landmark album, because they're taking a genre that's known for a specific type of thing and turning it a little bit on its head and saying, let's insert all of this prog feel to it and bring it in a new era. And I think it really worked. And I think a lot of modern bands owe a lot to this album and what it did for not just metal, but for progressive rock as well. Because there's a lot of other bands you could point to that created progressive metal albums at this time, even before Images and Words. So you can't really say this is the true beginning of everything about progressive metal. But I do think it really embraced the prog in a way that most of the albums that came before it hadn't yet. Even though they had intricate sections and different, really great playing and things that complex time signatures and all of that stuff was already being developed. But this to me is like them really saying, let's throw in our Yes and Genesis and classic prog inspirations, Rush and all of these classic bands into this stew, into our progressive metal foundation, and build something new with it. And I think it works on every level. It's a perfect album. So I love it and think it's so great of an album. And then that leads to the number one choice, which is obvious at this point, and it's going to be Scenes from a Memory. See that my version's cracked a little bit because I've played this CD like millions of times probably at this point. This is one of my all-time favorite records, and it's one of the ones that really drew me into the progressive rock scene in general. Like I was talking about earlier, I was introduced to progressive rock through my dad with the classics, then drawn in through Transatlantic to more modern prog, and was starting to really get into Spock's Beard and Flower Kings was kind of my entry level. But I heard so much chatter from people because I was getting so obsessive about it. So I was looking up online, like, what's the next prog album I should check out, and this and that. And so many people were talking about Scenes from Memory, like, this is like next level, the best prog album you'll ever hear. You know, it's a concept record, it's so good. So I had to go out. I went out without having heard a note of it. I went out to the store and bought this on CD and put it on my player, my CD player at the time, and was just immediately blown away by it. Because I was a little trepidatious, because I'd heard The Glass Prison and thought, okay, this is like Metallica on steroids or something, you know. I didn't think of it as a prog band, but I'm like, so many people are raving about it. Let me give them one last chance. Let me get this CD and really just try to immerse myself in it and see if I figure out what's so brilliant about it that everyone's buzzing about it. And it struck me almost immediately, like, this is something different, this is something special, and it just really connected with me, the whole storyline, the feel of it, the great overture. But really, to me, the moment where I was sold was in Fatal Tragedy, which just like blew my mind when I heard it, because there's just so much coolness going on. That kind of instrumental section where they kind of do a rock-in section, they pause, and then there's this organ kind of lick, and then they pause, and then Brian May-ish guitar lick, and it's so creative to me and showcases these different influences and inspirations. I just really love that instrumental section where they're trading off between keyboard and Petrucci's guitar solos, and it's just so cool, and that really hooked me in and said, okay, this is something special. You know, it's not just Metallica or some heavy metal. Not that I'm trying to trash on metal bands or anything. Just for my personal taste, I've always been a little bit opposed to metal because I feel like it can get a little repetitive and there's not enough variety, and it's this heavy riff that's just repeats so much that it kind of gets boring to me in a sense. But this was so different from that. It was like there's so much variety, so much creativeness. They're throwing in other influences, and there's other things going on in the makes, and then tying it all together is this epic storyline that I thought was really fascinating as well. So it just all came together and worked in a perfect way for me. And I think a big piece of this album and its success is the introduction of Jordan Rudess, who I think really brought some magic in the keyboards. Because what I was thinking about as I was listening to this and thinking about what makes this album so special to me is I like music. You know, it's cool to have music that's serious, that talks about very mature themes, and, you know, that delves into things that are important topics and that has that dark, heavy atmosphere. But for me, what really connects with me when I'm listening to music is having a little bit of fun in the mix with that stuff, you know, to break it up a little bit. Sometimes when something's overly dark and overly depressing, I just get a little overwhelmed by that. And I think Jordan Rudess just inserts just the perfect amount of whimsy and fun into the mix with his keyboard sounds. He'll insert like this like ragtime solo at certain points. He really brings a prog credibility because that's his world that he comes from, is from like this classic prog background, and I think he inserts it into the band in a bigger way than had been inserted it into their music at this point. And to me, that just created the perfect element to create the perfect record. That you have these serious subjects. It's a very serious story about, you know, this kind of reincarnation idea, and about murder, and about, you know, kind of figuring out who caused this murder, and kind of these moments of infidelity, and all of these serious kind of mature themes. But then you've got like the craziness of that instrumental section of Fatal Tragedy, as I mentioned, the great keyboard sounds at the end of Beyond This Life, one of my favorite tracks that just switches between these different soloing sections and has this great like rock groove to it. There's this bluesy style to the keyboard soloing that just totally works. And then of course Dance of Eternity, which goes through all these different time signatures and has this like ragtime piano section that just totally makes it fun to listen to, and brings a lot of light to this darker topic. And I think it just blends really well and makes for such a fun listen that's really something I can listen to over and over again without feeling too overwhelmed with the dark storyline and with this kind of darker message. And I love The Spirit Carries On. Once again, another heavenly, uplifting moment with like big choir, and just, it's one of their best ballads that I know a lot of people feel strongly connected to. And it ends with Finally Free, which is the perfect ending that tells the end of this story in such a fascinating way, and kind of gives this almost Twilight Zone-esque kind of story a great close and a great kind of twist ending before it ends with just like the record playing out with this, like, you know, it going off of the needle and just kind of running around and around with that kind of staticky sound. So, which of course kind of leads into the next album, and is how 6 Degrees of Turbulence starts, which they did for several of their albums throughout that period of time. So it's just a perfect album. It's really what brought me into my love of modern progressive rock and progressive metal. Like I've talked about a bit, I'm not the hugest progressive metal guy. Sometimes it's a bit too dark and heavy and overwhelming for me. I especially don't like growling vocals and heavy, like what sometimes they call Cookie Monster vocals. But I feel like Dream Theater does it right for me. You know, they strike that great balance where it's not just metal, it's a lot of different influences. There's poppier influences, there's prog influences, and they throw a lot into the mix that keeps it varied and interesting and breaks up the dark and heaviness with some lighthearted whimsy and some fun. And, you know, let's do this kind of ragtime piano solo. Let's do this jazzy section out of the middle of nowhere. That's the kind of prog I like, where it's just unexpected and adventurous and fun and doesn't take itself too seriously, and that's kind of what connects with me. So there you have it. That's my list of my favorite Dream Theater albums. Please let me know in the comments your lists. I know everyone's list is going to be wildly different. I know there's probably some choices that you quibble with my list, but hopefully you'll respect me and know that this is just me personally and how I feel. And a lot of the albums that are ranked a bit differently than you might traditionally think of are based on personal things to me that, you know, that's why I feel so strongly about this album, is because of my experiences that I've had with it. And you may not have had the same experiences. You may have had those experiences with different albums than what I had. So I'm always fascinated to hear people's perspectives, and please let me know in the comments. And if you have any, you know, information about these albums, and a lot of people know a lot of the behind the scenes stuff more so than what I know. And I love hearing about that and learning from you guys. So thank you guys again. Please subscribe if you like these videos. Hopefully I'll do another album rankings probably sometime in the new year. I'm going to take a little bit of a break as I kind of work out some of these end of year type of lists. You know, that's kind of the album ranking for next month, is ranking the end of year albums for 2021. So that should be a fun time as well. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and hopefully you guys have a great time out there, whatever you're doing. And please just enjoy the music. That's all I really ask of you guys out there. Please enjoy whatever you're listening to, whether it's Dream Theater albums or anything else that you've currently got on your turntable or in your CD player or on your device or whatever you're listening to. So thank you guys so much, and I'll hopefully see you guys in another video. Bye.